All right, hey, welcome. We're going to try to get through chapter two. I always say that we're going to get through it real quick, and we never do. Let's see what we can do here. All right, so chapter two, what we're looking at is the New World and the settlement of the New World, settlement patterns, exploration, and how we go from looking for a new way to get spices from Asia, avoiding Constantinople, which had been at this point has been conquered by the Turks or the Muslims. And how do we go from that to discovering this whole new these two new continents in the Western Hemisphere? And so let's begin. Let's not. There we go. All right. So really, when we look at this, Portugal is going to be the catalyst to this age of exploration. And Portugal's here. You can see it. It's that little red flick there off the coast of the Iberian Peninsula, or the Atlantic coast of the Iberian Peninsula. And they set up sailing schools, and they have advances in sails, like they use different types of ships like caravels, or they borrow sails from Muslim sailors and merchants that are triangle shape instead of the traditional square shapes of Europe of the day. Which allows them to sail into the wind. And Portugal goes out and they start to explore the west coast of Africa. And they set up these little trading colonies. They can't necessarily go deep into Africa because of disease and things that they don't have immunities to, but they do begin to trade. And then we have a Portuguese sailor that gets blown off course, and he goes around the Cape of Africa, around the bottom, and ends up on the other side. And when he comes back, he tells everybody that it's possible. And so then Diaz goes out in the early or the late 1490s, and he sails around the southern tip of Africa and starts to set up these trading empires on the other side. Portugal also is important in this story because they're the ones that are going to start the slave trade. They have a couple sugar islands, the Canary Islands out here, that they've colonized, and they're really good places for sugar plantations. And sugar cane production is very labor intensive, and it needs a lot of labor, and so the Portuguese begin to trade with African tribes for their prisoners. And that's going to be the start of this transatlantic slave trade that's going to displace 12 million people from Africa into the New World. Okay. Spain is right next door to Portugal, so they're going to obviously be in competition quite a bit, and they're going to, they don't want to get left behind. And they got this pesky little Italian sailor who's been peddling this idea of getting to Asia by heading west instead of by heading, around Africa. And Columbus is this guy, and he's been trying to talk the French into it, the British into it, the Portuguese into it, and nobody will bite. So finally he goes to Spain, and he spends like 6 years in the royal court trying to convince King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella about this idea. And eventually the king is just tired of him and decides the worst thing that's going to happen is Columbus is going to sail off the edge of the earth, and we're never going to have to get pestered by this guy again. And the best thing that's going to happen is he's going to discover a new way to Asia, and we're going to make a lot of money. What actually turns out is he runs into South America, and he makes more money than Spain can deal with. Queen Isabella at that time is a devout Catholic, and she is going to be more swayed by the idea of going out and converting Asia to Catholicism. And so that's where her support comes through. Columbus makes 3 voyages to the New World. It's not until 1499 that we actually discover that Columbus discovered something other than Asia. The first trip and a half, maybe the first 2 trips even, he believes that he is in Asia. He brings people back. And then by that point, Portugal had reached India. There's been overland trade for centuries by this point, and so people start to talk about what their experiences and what they've seen, and compare that to what Columbus is talking about, and they realize that there's something amiss. So Mario, what is his name? Vespesi explores South America for Portugal, and he realizes it's something totally different, and that's where America, North and South America, get their name. Okay, Portugal argues that the land that they found belonged to them because they're the first ones to get out and explore and reach Asia. Spain is like, like fun it does. And so the Pope agrees to basically split the world in two and give everything to the west of this dividing line to Spain, and everything east should belong to Portugal. And we do this in 1492, and it's called the Treaty of Tortillas. And Spain gets everything east and west. Okay, Spain is the first Eastern or European colony to, European power to establish settlements in the New World. They start on the island of Hispaniola, which is modern day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And thousands of Spaniards are going to flock to the New World seeking the 3 Gs, which are gold, God, and glory. There's lots of gold and silver in the New World, lots of precious metals to be mined, to be stolen from the natives. These natives haven't heard about Jesus yet, so we got to get out and spread the word. And finally, there's lots of glory. Go out and conquer new worlds, conquer kingdoms, conquer native people, and you'll become famous in Europe. And let's talk about a couple of those guys real quick. The first one is going to be Cortez. Cortez is going to be the downfall of the Aztec people. The Aztecs are probably the most powerful, they're the most powerful kingdom in the New World. They're not the most sophisticated because that's going to belong to the Incas. But the Aztecs live in central Mexico, modern Mexico City. They're very warlike people. They believe in a God that can only be appeased through human sacrifice. And without human sacrifice, the sun won't come up and go down in the night, go up in the morning, come down in the night. And so they will take prisoners from the people that live in tribes around them, and they'll sacrifice them to the sun gods. And so Cortez will make alliances with these Aztec enemies and eventually conquers the Aztecs. He actually gets help from a native woman that gets sold to him, and she acts as the translator for Cortez, and then eventually they're going to have a son together. There's a lot of controversy, modern controversy, on if that was a consensual relationship or not. You can look into that. There's a short YouTube video if you want to go through and watch that. Okay. Pizarro is another one of these conquistadors that are Spanish conquerors. And he is part of this wave of people that comes over. He kicks it around Panama, and he's told of this huge empire to the south in modern day Peru. And so Pizarro decides that he wants to be famous like Pizarro, and Pizarro wants to be famous like Cortez, and he's tired of his mom calling him up on the phone and being like, Panama is nice, but did you see what Cortez did with the Aztecs? And Pizarro was like, yeah, Mom, I know, I'm working on something. And so Pizarro gathers a group of warriors together, and they head out to Peru, and they encounter the Incas probably in the best time for the Spanish, the fact that the Incas had just fought a long and costly civil war, and they capture the leader of the Inca, the leaders of the Incas. They try to convert him to Christianity in a public ceremony, and of course he rejects. And so then Pizarro basically uses that as an excuse to conquer the whole empire, because they offended Jesus. There's a nice little video there about that as well. Okay, De Soto leads an expedition into North America, and he explores Florida and Georgia, Carolinas, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas. and checks all that out. Doesn't find any gold in North America. That's one of the reasons that kind of Spain leaves it alone. The other thing is it's so spread out compared to the isthmus of the Mexico and Latin America. Not a ton of land compared to like North and South America. And then you look at North America, it's flat, lots of prairies, open land, versus South America, you have rainforests and mountains. And so the population is relatively spread out, just so that it doesn't get to see a lot of it. But one thing he does do is he just spreads disease everywhere he goes. And most, I mean, there's estimates that 95% of the native population dies within the first 2 generations of contact with Europeans. I know, like an island of Hispaniola with the Spanish settlement, 99% of the native population of Hispaniola dies. And so you see a mass depopulation. Coronado is going to explore our area. He's looking for Quivira, which is this golden city, and he ends up going through like New Mexico and Texas and parts of Colorado, and he explores all the way up into like Lyons, Kansas, and modern day Lindsborg. And he never finds any gold. And you can see here the largest impact of the Spanish on the native population was the introduction of disease. You can see the population of Mexico shortly after Spanish contact is 22 million, and what by 1600 that's probably 1.5 million, 1.3 million, 1.7 million, I guess. I mean, like you see mass depopulation, and it's just devastating to these people. So those are some of the changes that are going to happen in the New World, especially in South America. Some of the changes that are going to happen in Europe during this time. Well, the Catholic Church is really going to fill this power vacuum that's left by the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire falls in 479. So let's just say 500. So from 500 to 1500, really the Catholic Church is the only unifying force of Europe, and they control learning, they control money, they control power, they can make kings, they can break kings, they can do all kinds of things. And so there's this weird relationship between popes and kings, and if this was a European or a world civilization class, we could spend more time on it. But like, just it's weird. Like, yeah, popes are crazy. Like there's one pope, Stephen VI, that becomes pope, and then he decides that he didn't like the previous pope, and so he has him dug up from his grave and puts him on trial for crimes against the church. And that's our picture down there. It's things like that, just corruption within the church. Like, they steal money. The church is a place where if you're kind of poor or middle class, but you kind of got a good mind, it's a place where you could receive an education. So people will join the church, not necessarily for religious reasons, but for social advancement. The church owns, 10% of all lands in Europe, and then they charge taxes on the other. And so, like, church is a good business. And so some reformers tried to bring about change, like, all the churches are taught in Latin, and basically nobody in Europe at this point speaks Latin. So reformers like Jan Hus, who's from Prague, start to give their sermons in the common language, and start to argue for the translation of the Bible into a common language, and for people to take a more meaningful role on the road to their salvation. And so the majority of these reformers are going to meet the same faith that Jan Hus is, where he gets burned at the stake. And then Martin Luther comes around. And so in 1517, Martin Luther is walking around. He's a monk in Germany, and he sees one of the common practices of the day, which is selling indulgences. And indulgences are a way to get into heaven quicker. The Catholic religion believes in 3 forms of afterlife. You have hell, you have purgatory, and then you have heaven. And so hell is where the bad people go. Heaven is where the saints go. Everybody else goes to purgatory to burn off their sins, or to wait off their sins until they get to heaven. Well, purgatory is not the worst, but it's not the best. But if you buy indulgences, you can get to heaven faster. And so if you sell these indulgences, they're kind of like get out of jail free cards, and the rich people are able to get into heaven while the poor people can. And Martin Luther thinks that's wrong, and the church kind of starts to exploit poor people. And so he writes up this thing called the 95 Theses, and he hammers it onto the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, which is, the church door is like the newspaper or the internet site of the day, right? Facebook or TikTok or whatever. And so it goes viral, right? Oh, look at me being young. Yeah, it goes viral. And it starts to pick up steam. And the church wants to kill him, and they invite him to all these conferences, and Luther goes into hiding. But one of the things that Luther has over other reformers is the invention of the Gutenheim printing press, which allows him to go into hiding, but still write and mass produce his ideas. And so he spreads his message, and he gets protected by German princes that live a long way from Italy. And they see this as an opportunity to gain some power away from the church. And I know this seems like it doesn't really connect to America. You're like, why are you sitting here talking about church history and all these things? But you're going to have two groups of Americans, two groups of colonists that first come to America. The first ones are going to be in Jamestown, and they're going to be looking to make money. And the second one are going to be Puritans, and Puritans are going to come from this revolt, which is known as the Reformation, that Luther begins. And so Luther gets kicked out of a church, and he starts his own church called the Protestant Church, in which Bibles are written in their native languages. There's no indulgences. Everybody gets to keep their money locally, I guess, right? Priests get to marry, which is really good for Martin Luther because he's had his eye on this local nun for a while, and they get married like that. And this idea of Lutheranism, Protestantism spreads throughout Europe, and it goes through a lot of different changes and causes lots of different conflicts and war. And it leads to this huge division in Europe in which different religious sects break out. So you have the Protestants, you have the Anglicans, you have the Anabaptists, you have the Calvinists, you have all these different churches that are going to pop up off of this Lutheran break. And probably the most important for us is going to be the Anglican Church, which is going to be the Church of England. And England is going to miss out on most of this first wave of the Protestant Reformation because they have a very strict Catholic king by the name of Henry. And Henry VIII. And Henry VIII was never really supposed to be king. He was actually second in line, and his brother was king. His brother was king, and then his brother dies unexpectedly. And so Henry's relatively young. I think he's like 18 or 19 when he takes the throne. And his wife, or I guess his brother's wife, I should say, is Catherine of Aragon. And she is a Spanish princess. She's the niece of Ferdinand and Isabella. And that's wrong. She might be. Anyway, she's related to them. And she's a Spanish princess. And so to keep peace between England and Spain, Henry marries his older sister, or his older sister-in-law, I guess. And they're married for quite a period of time. And they try to have kids and they can't. And she'll get pregnant and then lose the baby, or it's stillborn. And then Henry goes off to France for some reason. And Catherine puts down a revolt in Spain, and the people of England love Catherine, and they're really not so sure about Henry, and that really bothers Henry's ego. And so finally, Catherine brings a baby into the world, and wouldn't you know it, she has a little baby girl, and she names it Mary. And Henry's just so upset that he wants a divorce, and so he asked the Pope for an annulment. He'd been married to his brother's wife, and he said that she lied to him about not sleeping with his dead brother, which, come on, seriously. And and he wants to marry his younger mistress, Anne Boleyn. And the Pope is being held prisoner by the Holy Roman Empire, which is Catherine's nephew. And so he refuses. And so Henry's just like, all right, well, I saw what Martin Luther did, and I'll do the same thing. And so Henry just goes out and forms his own church. And he forms this Church of England, which is the Anglican church. And he keeps most of the religious stuff the same, but he gives all the church land to British nobles, and he grants himself a divorce, and he makes himself the head of the church. And he marries Anne, and then boom, she has a baby, and it's a girl. They name it Elizabeth. And then Henry's mad, and he decides that he's going to have this one killed. And so he cuts her head off because you can kill Anne because she's just English nobility and royalty, and like Spain's not going to invade you, right? And so he chops her head off, and he sends Elizabeth off to live with somebody else. Actually, she ends up living with Mary, as Mary's a little bit older than as Mary from the first marriage becomes an adult, but whatever. Then he gets married again, Jane Seymour. They have a son, and then Jane gets sick and dies, and then Henry marries 3 more times. He marries Anne of Cleves, and he falls for a picture that he sees of her, and he's like, oh, I got to marry that. And then she shows up, and she doesn't look like the painting, and so he divorces her, and then he marries young Catherine Howard, who's like 18, and this time Henry's like 45 or whatever, and Catherine Howard wants to go out to the club and do young things, and Henry wants to stay at home and watch Fox News. And so he catches Catherine having an affair, and he chops her head off, and then he marries Catherine Parr, and then she's the lucky one because Henry dies on her. And so Edward comes to the throne. He converts the country to Protestantism, and everybody's upset. And then he dies at age 15. And then his sister comes to the throne, and she's Mary. And she actually marries Philip II from Spain. And so at one point, Mary's not only the Queen of England, but she's also the Queen of Spain. And Philip II is not only King of Spain, but he's King of England. And they revert everybody back to Catholicism, and everybody's unhappy. And Mary goes around just chopping everybody's head off that is Protestant. And so she develops this nickname called Bloody Mary, and eventually she dies. And then Elizabeth, who is Mary's younger sister, comes to the throne, and she reverts back to the Church of England, which is Anglicanism, and it's kind of this middle ground for religious change. And so here we have this picture of Mary keeping everybody in the middle, and so we're there. So where are we at? Okay, after Elizabeth's death, James I takes over, and then we have this situation where they start to persecute Protestants, and from 1620 to 1630, many Protestants moved to the United States, and they settle in the New England territories, and we'll talk about that, but that's a little bit of in front of where we are. So Spain kind of sees itself as this defender of Catholicism, and the English support the Dutch in this revolt, and the Dutch want to become Protestant, and the Spanish don't want to, and Elizabeth refuses to marry a Spanish prince. And so the Spanish and England kind of go to this undeclared war, but England's not really a very powerful nation. And the Spanish are just bringing in all kinds of gold and silver from the New World. So England starts to use privateers, which are basically just pirates that are sanctioned by England to steal gold and silver ships from the Spanish. Sir Francis Drake is the most famous, and he actually gets knighted, and there's rumors that he and Elizabeth are lovers, but whatever. And so Spain tries to invade England in the late 1600s with the Spanish Armada. And while the Spanish Armada, this large invasion fleet, is anchored off the coast of France, the British attack them with cannon fire, and they light some ships on fire, and they sail them into the Spanish fleet, and the Spanish fleet panics, and they go out to sea, and they get caught in a storm, and they get sunk. And it's such a blow to the Spanish military power that they never really recover from that. But Shortly before that, England begins to explore the New World looking for this Northwest Passage, and they discover great fishing lands off the coast of Nova Scotia, up in Canada and the Northeast, and Henry and Mary and Edward, they don't really encourage a whole lot of settlement, but when Queen Elizabeth comes to the throne, she encourages people to go to the New World and settle, and she's trying to limit the influence of Spain. And the English don't necessarily find gold or silver, but they discover tobacco and they send that back to Europe, and that becomes very popular. And then they find corn, which is probably even more important than tobacco, because it allows Europeans to change their diet to the point that the average life expectancy increases by 15 to 20 years, and the average height of Europeans increases by 3 or 4 inches. And so it just puts more calories in the diet of Europeans. So the first settlement's Roanoke Island, and that doesn't go so well. In fact, they run out of supplies, and the captain leaves Roanoke Island to go back to England. And by the time he gets back, everybody's gone. The second attempt or the first successful attempt is Jamestown, which is in Virginia, and it started as a joint stock company. So that means that people invest in this idea and they're going to share the profits, and they start to grow tobacco and they start to make money. And Jamestown actually is kind of made up of British aristocrats that come from rich families, but these are second or third born, and so they're not going to have land grants in the New World. They make a ton of money, and then Britain begins to colonize other places like Barbados or Bermuda, and over there on the left you see the Bermuda shorts. And again, the English don't find gold and silver, but they find tobacco and sugar and rice, and those are more profitable in the long run. 1620, the Pilgrims show up, and they settle in the New World. They sign the Mayflower contract. And that's the beginning of the European settlement there. You have the French that come and they focus on trade. The French and the Dutch both focus on trade. And they have pretty good relations with the Native Americans. They're more focused on the fur trade than anything else. And so you have settlement differences that we need to talk about real quick. The Spanish and the French and the Dutch, all the land belongs to the king. And so you could go there, you could work the land, you could settle the land, but like you don't own it. And so if the king wants it, he could take it back. And so it's typically single men that come and they're looking to get rich and then return back to Europe and improve their social standings. The English are either owned by companies or they're owned by individuals, and you can actually buy land and you can own a chunk of land. And in Europe, during this time frame, land ownership is really unheard of. And so the ability to own land is really, really attractive. And so people start to go there and they bring families and they settle and they stay. And so over time, over a couple of generations, the population of the English settlements are huge compared to the Spanish and the French. And that's going to give the English a huge advantage in the New World. Okay. Mercantilism talks about this economic system in which the colonies are dependent on their parent country, and that's the only country they can trade with. And so you're going to, grow tobacco, and you have to send it to England to be processed, and then they send it back to buy tobacco in a finished product. That's a poor example, but that's one of them. You could trade raw materials, but everything that you buy comes from your parent country, so that typically those prices are inflated. It's a great program for wealth to develop in Europe, not so great for the colonies. We also have this Columbian exchange in which plants and animals and diseases are transferred from the old world to the new world, from Europe and Africa to the United States. And this is known as the Columbian exchange. And you can see here the plants that come over from the new world are like apples and bananas and coffee and grapes, and sugarcane was not native to North America, but it turns out that it's a great crop that you can grow in the tropics. Wheat comes over and it's easily grown here. corn is the big one. Corn and squash come from the New World to the Old World, and it increases the dietary the amount of calories in the diets. The diseases that come over, the flu, malaria, smallpox, and yellow fever wipes out huge portions of the population. Same thing's going to happen in the Old World, but there's more population and there's less contact. Okay, America is going to send tobacco, sugar, chocolate, corn, and spices, and corn is going to improve the European diet. We've talked about that. Europeans are going to send pigs and horses are going to have a huge effect on the Plains Indians, which are going to allow them to hunt buffalo using horseback instead of stampeding buffalo off of cliffs. Of course, we're going to change the population of Africa by taking individuals from Africa and enslaving them and bringing them into the New World. And so that's going to get us there. Hopefully that kind of explains a little bit about the new, about this, the settlement patterns and the changes in Europe and the New World. And then we're going to actually get some colonists started in chapter 3. So look forward to talking to you guys soon. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.